Welcome back to Your Messy Brilliance podcast. I'm Kelly McNeilis, and I'm the founder of Women for One. And today I am so honored to be speaking with a truth teller at Women for One from several years ago, many years ago, Elizabeth Lesser. So I'm so thrilled to bring you this conversation today because I believe that she's one of the most powerful voices in spirituality and human development of our time. And to give you a sense of what she stands for, I want to read a quote from her because you know how much I love quotes. And I love this quote, and it really just represents how I feel into her. Beneath the chatter of the mind and the storms of the heart is a truer self, an essential self, a core, a soul, she says. More and more in glimpses caught through meditation and prayer, through acts of kindness and courage, and sometimes, this is what I love, just by having a cup of coffee in the morning or a sip of wine with friends, I find myself quite suddenly in touch with the fullness of being that wakes me out of slumber. My work has always been to stay connected to my true self and to help others on their paths to authentic personhood. And that's what I think when I think of Elizabeth. She's a teacher of, I love authentic personhood. It's not just sisterhood, it's authentic personhood. And someone whose books and legacy are all about helping people tap into their essential self. So if you're familiar with her name, and if you are not, you should be, you'll also know Elizabeth is best as the co-founder of the Omega Institute, a wellness and spirituality center in Rhinebeck, New York. She's also the author of several books who we featured on Women for One before, Broken Open, How Difficult Times Can Help Us Grow, and Marrow, Love, Loss, and What Matters Most. And her newest book, which we're going to talk about today, Cassandra Speaks, When Women Are the Storytellers, the Human Story Changes. So, I mean, how cool is that? Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great to be back with you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this book and your soul with us, because I really felt like that when I was reading it. This book, I mean, literally, I could spend 4 hours. I'd love to have a full day retreat with you just to talk about this book. So I hope you break it down someday in a retreat, because I'd come. So what part of your story specifically, because you talk about stories, and that's what we are about at Women for One, led you to writing this book?
I'd say my whole life story. I was, got a few hours. I was born into a family of 4 girls and a pissed off mother who really just always wanted to express herself in more ways than being a suburban mom, and a very domineering father. And for some reason, I was the one of the 4 girls who thought, this isn't fair. What's going on here? How come he gets to tell us all what to do? So from the littlest girl, I was a feminist. And then I found myself a leader in a young organization. We started Omega Institute in the late 1970s, and I was a leader, but I was the only woman in leadership for a long, long time. And I had that same sense of wait a minute, there's things I know inside of myself. I don't quite know how to say them because I'm speaking in a male leadership language that I'm trying so hard and so quick to learn, but I'm leaving huge parts of myself, my soul, my femaleness behind in order to function in this male-dominated world. It's not that everybody was bad or mean or awful. It's just wasn't me. And then I tell a story in the book about meeting one of the many, many faculty who've come through Omega, a mythologist, a woman, who told me the tale of Cassandra, the old Greek tale. And it was from that conversation with her that I went on to start a conference series at Omega called Women and Power, where we explored not just how do women get more power, not at all. How, once we get into leadership, wherever we are, whether it's in your relationship or at work, how do we change what power even means? How do we bring out into the world what lives locked inside of us? And it was that Cassandra story that really started it for me.
I love that. And I want to talk about women in power in a few minutes. But for those people who don't know who Cassandra is, can you tell us a little bit about her and why her story is so relevant to women today? Because I loved that story, because I found, when I've been to spiritual retreat centers or any kind of place, if I'm looking, sometimes when I'm not even looking, there some auspicious event happens, like what happened to you with the woman dribbling on your sweater.
I don't think people are going to know what you're talking about here. Women don't just come up to me and dribble on my sweater. So I will tell you that story. I was sitting in the faculty dining room at Omega. At any point at Omega, there's several hundred people. And then we have a little dining room behind the big one, so teachers can get a little space. And usually there's such a fantastic mix of people in that faculty room, whether people are teaching a sports class or a meditation class or an art class or whatever. We have such a holistic blend of people. And one of the people in the room that day was a mythologist. She was a classics professor. She was part of a conference on myth and its meaning in the world today. And I had lent her a sweater the night before because it was cold. And I looked over at her and she was so lost in reading, she was dribbling soup all down her sweater, but it was my sweater. So I was staring at her and she must have felt my eyes on her back because she turned around and motioned for me to come over. And those kind of people who they don't just say, "How are you?" They say, "How are you?"
Yes.
And you think, uh-oh, she's seeing into me. And she asked me that, and I said, well, actually, I'm not doing that great because I had been in a meeting that morning that were like so many other meetings where I found myself almost like whining or using a voice that people weren't listening to, mostly men. And, or I'd say something and then a few minutes later, what I said was like coming out of the mouth of one of the men as his wisdom, but it had been mine. And I was just so frustrated. Mm-hmm. And I said this to her and she said, this reminds me of Cassandra. You know her, right? And I said, not really. So she told me the tale. Cassandra was a princess from Troy. She was ancient Greek figure, and she was so beautiful and compelling. All the men were after her, even the gods. Zeus was after her, and Zeus's son Apollo was the one who wooed her with the most compelling gift. And he said, I'll give you the gift of clairvoyance. You will be able to see into the future. She wanted that. I'd like that too. And so she took the gift. And then he tried to have sex with her, and she hadn't realized that was part of the deal, and she refused him, and he was furious. And in retaliation, he didn't take the gift away, he kept the gift, but he said, yeah, Cassandra, you'll see into the future, but no one will believe you. You will see everything, but no one will believe your stories. And this happened. Cassandra saw everything. She predicted the war between Greece and Troy, the Trojan War. She predicted that all of her family would die. She predicted that the city would lay in ruins, but no one believed her. They called her hysterical. They called her overwrought. And eventually she went mad from knowing the truth, feeling the truth, knowing what mattered, but not being believed. And
isn't that us? Isn't that us?
That's
now?
us
as women.
And as I was writing the book, the Me Too movement really was flourishing, and I would see in so many of the stories that were happening of women who were calling out what had happened, and not only would they not be believed, they'd be shamed. And I thought, I'm going to tell Cassandra's tale and many other old tales from history and literature about how women have known forever in our bones what matters, what we know this world could be. But we've been called, too emotional, too soft, Pollyanna, as opposed to wow, these women see what's really possible for the world. Look at what we excel at care, at nurture, at bringing people together. Look at the women leaders right now in the world.
Right.
Jacinda Ardern, Angela Merkel, other women leaders who are dealing so well with the pandemic. We know what to do now, and we've got to be listened to.
We do. And I love that you brought that up because we are in hard times right now. But let me go back to what you said about the women that spoke their truth, because something that particularly resonated with me, I'm a incest survivor. I don't even like to call it survivor. I'm an incest experiencer. I made it through, and I was a gymnast and my daughter was a gymnast. So I really, with Larry Nassar, and what happened with him, and saw the women that had the courage in the new generation to speak up and say no more against someone like that, and how they were discounted and discounted. It takes so long for us as women to be recognized, so that we can begin to heal from the stories that have happened. And I just
That
wanted to
was
thoughts on
one of my favorite / difficult chapters to write in the book. I write all about the trial.
Yes.
And what I loved about that trial, besides the pain and weeping I did, because it was all televised,
Yes.
and you can still watch it, a film was made about it. These young women, and some of them not so young anymore, because this had been going on for 30 years. Young women had been telling their parents and the authorities at the schools and the universities where they were training, the Olympics, they'd been telling people what had been happening, and no one had believed these girls. And at the trial, the Judge Aquilina, she to me was, when I say in the book that we have to tell brave new endings to our stories, she told a brave new ending, how to listen to women. She is the one who allowed so many victim statements into the courtroom, so many that it went on for days, and they made Larry Nassar sit there and listen to woman after woman tell her story and be heard and have the dignity and the experience in one's body of when someone finally listens to you and hears you. And I just bow to that woman, Judge Aquilina, for saying these girls must be heard. When you are heard and believed, healing happens.
Oh, I'm just tearing up hearing you talk about this. And this is not on my docket of questions, but this is what happens with me. I have this question that comes up, because what do you think, because in my personal experience as an incest survivor, my family has not acknowledged that this happened with my father. They will, and the only person in my book that wouldn't sign off as I spoke my truth was my mother. I'm curious how you suggest women move through that, where they're not acknowledged right now. Do you have any suggestions and tools about how we can move forward when we speak our truth and we're cut down continuously and not acknowledged by even family members?
Well, the first bit of advice I have is to go way, 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 way back to the story of Eve. Exactly. To the story of Cassandra, to the story of Pandora, to stories in every culture. People have not been believing women from day one, or they've been interpreting women's just normal human behavior as wrong, bad, and sinful, born second, first to sin. This is deep in our history. And for me, I don't know if this is the same for everyone, but when I see how this has been going on forever, and it depersonalizes it for me, because what happens when you're not believed over and over is you stop believing yourself. And this is gaslighting. We've been gaslit from the beginning of time. We know what happened, but people don't believe it. And it makes me cry, even after having written this book and interviewed so many people. not to believe yourself is so painful. It makes life so much more difficult than it has to be. So to feel part of a historical sisterhood of people who have not been believed or whose normal actions have been interpreted as wrong, to feel like, oh, it's not just me. This has been going on to women forever. That is very helpful to me in my own untangling my own stories of why do I have such imposter syndrome in my 60s after having been such a successful person? Because we've been trained not to trust ourselves, not to believe ourselves. That helps me. And the other, you asked me, well, what happens when even your mother doesn't believe what happened to you? How do we move through that? At a certain point, and maybe as a meditator, you know this yourself, at a certain point, it has to all be about you believing yourself, discovering within you an internal dignity that does not need the outside world to prove to you that you are good and worthy and that you belong. And the practice of meditation for me is all about reconnecting with my inner dignity, creating that strong backbone that protects me and that soft front that can stay open because I protect myself. Over and over and over practicing, I don't need the world to validate me. I don't need my mom to believe me in order to believe myself. It's hard. It's hard work. Would it be better if your mother said, darling, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry that I have discounted you like this. I believe you. Would that be so wonderful? Yes. You're going to have to be your own mother, and you're going to have to find other mothers. And I'm sure you have. Look what you've done. Look what you've created. So we can do that. We can find our own mothers and our own sisters and our own families and our own beautiful men, good men who can re-father us and re-brother us. They're out there, but the first person and really the only person who can do it is ourselves.
That's such a beautiful answer, because at the age of, I'm coming up on my 52nd year on this earth. And I think the process of my book was to really realize that, in the middle of my book launch, to have my mom say that she denied this was such a learning. And we talk about, and I've heard you talk about this before, but do you find that getting an awareness of our stories, and also, some stories are icky, like we just talked about, they're dark, they're the shadow place in our lives. I find that moving through those stories are sometimes even much more helpful in owning and getting an awareness of what our self-talk and how we move through the world and how it's in our DNA as women. So I wanted you to speak on that.
Well, yeah, the dark stories are always they're the hero's journey.
Right.
And the hero's journey has always been told by men. You go back into antiquity and you read, everything from the Iliad and the Odyssey all the way up to Tom Sawyer, and then Raiders of the Lost Ark, and even Star Wars and things like that. We think they're the only type of hero's journey, but they've only been told by men. Personally, I don't relate to violence as part of being heroic. I know that firemen and policemen and soldiers are sometimes necessary and good and great and heroic, but that's just one kind of hero. Mm-hmm. Women have many heroic stories, and some of them are our darkest tales. Recovering from sexual abuse is one of them. Giving birth to babies. Come on. How come that isn't a heroic journey? How come there aren't statues all over the place next to the soldiers of women giving birth? Why is the dark story of war the only ones we look at as what we call courageous? That's a kind of dark story, the the obstacles that we have gotten through as women that I feel should be told. But then there's other kind of stories too. The real shadow work, as Jung calls it, the Jungian shadow work, which is actually looking at parts of ourselves that I call cleaning up our own bullshit. That's my favorite. That's
Yes.
what when people say shadow work, it sounds very sort of exotic, but really it's about cleaning up our bullshit. Women, we say we're going to do power differently. We say we have something inside of us that leans towards nurture and leans toward compassion. Whether it's nurture or nature, how we got this doesn't matter to me anymore. Women, that's what we do. You know, they say under stress, you fight or flight, but they've been finding in a lot of research that women actually under stress go to something called tend and befriend. So we have that. We have the tend under stress. We seek to tend the sick and the children and the older parents and to befriend the enemy. We have that instinct in us. But we also have the other, and we also have weird coping mechanisms that we have developed years of living under patriarchy that are not very nice and pleasant. You know, like we can be very passive aggressive and mean, and it comes out a lot with men. We ask men to be sensitive now and to be better husbands and better fathers and to show their weakness. But often when that happens, we don't like it. We kind of ask men to be two things, still be the white knight, but also be the kind, sensitive person. And we drive good men crazy in that. That's something.
I'm sorry, you're making me laugh because that's me and my husband. I'm right in the middle of that. He's like this powerful man, but you know, I expect him to be soft and sensitive, but then I want him to be like the fighter and the leader.
We do that, and it's a fabulous thing to be aware of because
Right.
we all have been wounded and stamped by quote unquote patriarchy, which is, by that I just mean an unbalanced system of leadership. So we have our inner patriarch too, and we do lots of strange things also. So it's so good to be aware of it. And if you have the kind of mate where you can say, whoa, I'm sorry, look what I'm doing to you. Let's talk this out. Let's do this differently. I'm just as wounded as you are. You're in the man box. I'm in the woman box who's trying to keep the man in the man box, but also let the man out of the man box. Like, let's deconstruct this as we go along.
I love that. I love to deconstruct because I literally can see my husband doing that with me. We do that together. And I can own that sometimes, but it's so challenging, Elizabeth. So it's wonderful to get that coaching, that's all it's about. And as you're talking, I keep having this vision, the whole Cassandra Speaks book, it feels to me like you're looking down and you're asking women to either look up and be aware and dive in. It's like, let's dive in and then let's look up and see where we are. That's what I keep seeing as this vision.
I love that.
And I just keep seeing it over and over in my head, like in my heart. It's like, oh, we're going to look up. Come on, wake up. Because I've never understood sometimes. I mean, I'm starting to through this book and we do what we need to learn, starting Women for One. Felt like I get frustrated, and I didn't understand why I was so frustrated with patriarchy. Now I'm getting it. It's because I'm bought in. It's in my DNA and it's in all of our DNA. So we have to kind of look up, be aware, would you say, and then dive into who we are to make change.
Beautiful. Yeah, because blame, we don't really have time for blame anymore. Like, we have a world to save. And we have peoples to save and children to save. And we need to do it with men. We've all been wounded by an imbalanced system. So, look up, look down, own our shit, look out, clean up the shit, the whole thing. And it doesn't have to be heavy. It can be an adventure. It's an adventure.
It's an adventure. So I want to dive into imposter syndrome because I wrote about that in my book. The whole book is, Perfectly Imperfect Self, your messy brilliance. And I find that I'm still suffering from it. And when I haven't done interviews in a while, and I did one last week, and I felt very confident and good because I felt that this person was like, that I interviewed, he's an amazing man, was beautiful, and we were friends, and he accepted me. But as soon as I get around anybody that's a woman in power that I deem as successful, like, you know, more successful than me, to own it, like in that way, like where that's imposter syndrome, I start feeling small. And I'm owning that because I feel like a lot of women feel this way. I feel like and then I coached myself this morning and said, Elizabeth talks about imposter syndrome in her book, right? You have to like own this and just be who you are. And I'm just moving into that. And I know you talked about moving into that in your book as well. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, for example, are you feeling small right now?
No, I'm feeling great. It's always before an interview.
Right. So what are like, I was going to turn it on you, and then I realized, wait a minute, she's interviewing you. Stop this.
No, go for it. I don't, this is my nature. I get criticized sometimes because I make it about me, but I deem myself as a woman that's going through certain shit in my life, and I put myself out there so other women can learn from it. That's
Oh, no. I remember when I was first, I had a radio show when Oprah Winfrey had a Sirius XM radio channel.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And she asked me to host a show. And I practically had an imposter syndrome attack. I happened to be working for her at the time, but behind the scenes, which was my favored way of working, you know, just like I was like a research person and helping her take some of the self-help spirituality books and turning them into online learning. And I helped her produce a large event she did with the author Eckhart Tolle.
Mm-hmm.
And I happened to be in Chicago during that, when I was helping her do that. And she said, you know, I need someone to host a radio show, and I have someone in mind. And I was like, oh yeah, who's that? You. And I was like, I don't know anything. God help. And so I'm bringing this up because her advice to me as she was training me to do this was always bring yourself in. Bring yourself into the story, because it's stories and it's two women telling their stories with each other. That's how people learn. So I'm giving you that from her. Like, don't say people criticize you for bringing yourself in. This is such a thing.
It's
women,
bullshit. Yeah,
it is. It's like, your story is so important and so helpful. So I'll get off that right now. But that's what I wanted to say to you. The imposter syndrome. Why wouldn't women have the imposter syndrome if from the beginning of time we have been told your story doesn't matter, or your story actually is what ruined everything? Look at our first mother, Eve, Adam and Eve. She was born second. You know, everything was great in the Garden of Eden. It was just Adam and God, two dudes. And then God decided to make a helpmate for Adam. She came along and she was in the garden and she was curious, which men always are curious, but she was curious, and a snake, who in those days, the snake was the carrier of wisdom. So the old stories were told and then they were interpreted year after year. But back in the day, the snake brought wisdom, and the snake told her, eat this tree. You're not going to die from it. You're going to become wise. And so Eve ate and gave to Adam. And then they went on their hero's journey. They had to leave home, the Garden of Eden, in order to discover themselves and to grow up. And there are heroes like that throughout the Bible. Whether it's Noah or Job or Jesus himself, the story is all about exile, test, and then finding out who you truly are. Eve's the only person in the Bible who is punished for the hero's inclination to leave home and grow up. She's really, in my mind, the Bible's first grown-up. But from the beginning of time, we have been told any instinct in you to strut your stuff, to find out wisdom, to speak your truth, to speak your mind is wrong, is bad. Shh, be quiet, sugar and spice and everything nice. Be small, keep yourself small. So whenever we follow the impulse in ourselves to be who we really are, to be big, to be bold, to create, to say what we know in our bones, we're punished. And if we're not punished literally, we feel it. Everything in us feels it. Oh, I've said too much. I've talked too much.
Yes.
I'm a show off. Shh, be quiet, be prim, be good. And you might think, well, the younger generation, they're so woke, they're not doing that anymore. Not true. Still
Agreed.
happening.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the imposter syndrome comes from. And I am in my 60s, and I feel it almost every single time I get up there to speak. Every time I'm in a meeting and I say something that's going against the grain, especially if it's mostly men, but also with women. Just to, it's like we say, be yourself, be authentic. But what if the authentic self is very different from the status quo? Then what happens? Well, it's what happens to any brave soul. You feel small, you feel unworthy, but somehow you have to reach deep inside and say, is it good? Is it going to help? Is it true? If it is, so what? All the other people are saying it. I'm just going to say it. But one of my favorite writers, and you probably love her too, Brene Brown, she says a beautiful small saying, just 3 words, clear is kind. Clear is kind. So we have it mixed up, women do, that nice and kind are the same thing. I have to be nice. Nice, get rid of nice. Replace it with kind. Kind is another word for true. So sometimes if you are clear and kind, you're going to still upset other people. You're going to get what you want and they're not going to get what they want. But if we're going to do what we know needs to be done in this world, include more people, heal the planet, make choices that in the long run are going to save the species. Sometimes we're going to upset other people. And a lot of times our imposter syndrome comes from this fear that if we say what we know is true, other people are going to be upset. So there are ways to say your strong truth with a strong backbone and a kind heart, but to say it, just to say it.
Oh, I love that. It's clear as kind. It's truth. It's being authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk about that, there are a lot, as we all know, of very important issues vying for our attention right now. Climate change, the pandemic, Black Lives Matter, politics. It's for now, I'm a bit overwhelmed, as we all are right now with our world. So how do you see the struggles and contributions of women fit into all this? And how can women rewriting our collective stories change the current landscape?
Well, it is an overwhelming time. And I know in myself, even when things aren't overwhelming, I'm always hearing that voice in my head, whether it comes from my mother or the culture or my grandmother or who knows what, which is like, don't take up too much space. There's other things that are way more important now. Be quiet. And all I can say is that all of these things matter. Everything matters now. Climate change matters. What's our brave Black and brown sisters and brothers are doing, and we are finally joining in a real way, that matters. The politics and the people who are helping make sure that every vote counts and that this election turns out in a way that's good and holy. Everything matters, but that doesn't mean that women's stories and the way women change the story doesn't matter. It might sound like right now that I know what I'm talking about. It's only because I've had to, when the book came out just a couple of weeks ago, in the middle of all these pandemics, I thought, oh, I'm just gonna kind of roll over and let the other stories prevail, because I think that's what we've just always done.
Mm-hmm.
So women's stories matter so much now, especially if the story is about changing how we define power, changing how we define leadership. Finally, women trusting ourselves enough to say, what lives in my heart about care and compassion and inclusion and beauty and like the power of feeling, you know, our best traits, women's best traits, our ability to grieve and feel and share and love and tend and befriend. We don't have to prove our masculinity. Like that's like a gift right now. We can come from our deep, authentic natures. That is what the world needs now. We need to dignify what women know in our bones.
I love that. Tend and befriend and know in our bones. Like that's just, I just got to absorb that for a second. Everyone listen to that. And one of my last questions is about men. And as we spoke before, we jumped on here. I have 4 sons, 2 stepsons and 2 of my own, and a stepdaughter and a daughter. So we have 6 total. And I didn't grow up with brothers or sisters. I have them from my mom had kids later. But I wanted to ask you, this isn't about just women, right? So learning to teach our men, and I'm excited to have grandchildren, not yet, but getting there, learning to teach our men and our sons to be compassionate and the beauty of the feminine qualities. I've always said when I've been interviewed that I see the new way of being is integrating the feminine and the masculine. So I wanted to ask your opinion on that for men, because I adore them.
Yeah. I mean, I also have been married 2 times, not simultaneously, of course. And I have 2 sons and a stepson. I have 3 grandsons, 2 granddaughters.
Oh, wow.
And 2 of my grandsons live next door to me. So I grew up in a family of 4 girls, but I have been surrounded by men and boys at work and home my whole adult life. And it's been an enormous learning for me. And what I see happening now, especially with fatherhood, I actually think conscious fatherhood might be the one thing that saves the world. Because
I love that.
When I see my sons and the way they father, and I think if I had had a father like that, I would have been a very different woman and way more confident in my voice. My sons are sharing equally in parenting, and my daughters-in-law expect that. It's not like, honey, could you babysit? They expect it. They know these men are capable of caring, and they've got the compassion chip. It's just been undeveloped in them. And my daughters-in-law, that's what they expect. And my sons are rising to the occasion. And my husband, my second husband, he always says that becoming a single father, and he was his son's main parent after his divorce, was a gear grinding in the opposite direction experience for him for years and years. He said it was enforced intimacy. He had very little intimacy skills, having been a man who grew up in the 1950s and 60s. He was a jock. He became a lawyer. He just was an old version of a man, and it was having to be his son's main parent, and the relentlessness of caring that taught him how to be a different kind of man. And that's what I met him as he was in that crucible, and I respected it so much. That's what I respected in him, the way he was parenting. And so people often say, not women, for women to own the fact that we're more nurturing. Often feminists feel that's a dangerous thing to do because it keeps us in that box of that's all women know how to do. It doesn't matter to me if our caring chip comes from nature or nurture. I want everyone to make the ability to care and nurture be the most important thing that humans can do. I want everybody, men and women, to respect that part of humanity so much that it becomes the most heroic thing humans can do, to care for each other and to care for the earth. So I see men beginning to own that more, especially fathers, and it fills me with hope. So it's not just women becoming powerful by entering what we have defined power as all these years. It's redefining what it means to be powerful so that men and women and our traits and our what we know how to do, they're all equally respected.
Yes, caring for each other and the earth. And the redefining power is huge. It's not about power, like going out there. And you talk about that in the book as well. And you created the Women in Power retreat because of that. Because you, from what I understand, you wanted us to all understand what that power means for women. That it's not about the masculine, go get it. It's about bringing forth the qualities in the feminine and moving them into a different space for all of us to embrace as men and women. Would you say?
I would say it's about both. I would say that women learning how to be an authority, how to prevail, how to move things forward, how to explore, how to initiate. This is wonderful for women to learn and to own. And at the same time, not to throw away then the other tendencies that we have honed over millennia. So men don't have to throw away the quote unquote masculine qualities, but they have to incorporate and learn other ones. I mean, women have spent the past 100 years learning how to enter the male world, and we've gained a lot from it. I'm so glad I know how to strategize and how to be a leader. I'm so glad I've learned these quote unquote masculine traits. But now men have to learn the other traits or we're not going to make it as a species.
I love that. There's so much I could talk to you about, but I encourage everyone to get this book. And I find, Elizabeth, I've read it and reread it and reread it. Like there's so much to take. Like it's one of those books that you can pick up a month from now, read it and see it from a different perspective. And there's only been a few books I've ever read that are like this book. So thank you for that, for women, for the world, for men as well. Could you read a bit of what you dream? I think it's in the intro of When You Dream of a Better World for us so that we can leave with that.
Certainly. Yeah. I this dream, as I end the introduction with, it comes from a quote that Toni Morrison said that as you enter positions of trust and power, dream a little before you think. And so here is my dream that lives in me, that when I stop overthinking things, this dream arises like the cream on top of the milk. When I dream of a better world, I dream of men fearlessly reclaiming words and traits that have been coded feminine, feelings, empathy, communication. I dream of women reclaiming traits that have been coded masculine: ambition, confidence, authority. But what I dream of most is men and women mixing it up, blending it all together, tempering power with wisdom, giving muscle and prestige to love and nurture. That's my dream. I hope this book gives voice to yours and helps you weave the new stories the world is waiting for.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'm just so honored to have spoken with you. There's so many nuggets in this conversation with us, and I'm just really honored to know you and that you took the time to speak with Women for One.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you so much. And everyone, we will have a link to Elizabeth Lesser's book on our site. And please let us know what you think of the book. I'd love to hear from all of you and create a conversation about how women can claim their voice and move forward with their stories. Bye.